Welcome back, guys, to the Great Ace Attorney 2 Resolve, where last episode we solved the second part of Sholmes' great deduction, shooting down the balloon in the room to find the professor's enclosed waxwork head within, before locating the missing engineer Enoch Drebber within the room's safe. However, we quickly found out that we weren't safe, as Sholmes disarmed what really was a time bomb, before we talked to our quarry only to find out another bomb had been planted elsewhere. Now our second day of trial begins with Barak von Zeeks and his assistants soon to call Drebber to the stand. With the circumstances of the trial having changed somewhat within the last 24 hours, we still find the accusation of murder laid upon Professor Harebrain, as we resume our defense.
Objection!
As Lord Van Zeeks rightly says, this is a very different trial now. The accused accepts responsibility for his part in the events that transpired. He acknowledges that Mr. Asman died as a result of the accident caused by his machine's malfunction. However, unbeknownst to the professor, he was being deliberately deceived by a pair of very clever fraudsters.
Names, counsel, if you please.
The engineer, Mr. Enoch Drebber, and the victim himself, Mr. Odi Asman. So what exactly were these two men up to behind the defendant's back? The defense intends to expose that information, thus establishing the unequivocal innocence of the defendant.
Thank you, counsels. The positions of the prosecution and defense have been clearly stated. Lord Van Zeeks, summon your first witness, please.
At once, my lord. The prosecution calls the engineer, Mr. Enoch Drebber, to the stand. We really did start with him. Tick, tock. And state your name and occupation for the court. Name, Enoch Drebber. Occupation. Hard to pin down, I would say. See that black monocle? Yes, why do I feel as though I've seen this somewhere before? Oh, you too? I had exactly the same feeling myself.
Your file indicates that you are currently being investigated in connection with another case. The theft of a waxwork model, is it? A most extraordinary sounding business.
Well, that has no bearing on this trial, I assure you. Cleave it from your mind. You're familiar with the public experiment carried out at the Great Exhibition some days ago? The accused super high voltage instantaneous kinesis demonstration. Yes, you could say that. I am aware of it. There was a terrible accident, wasn't there? It was you, Mr. Drebber, who constructed the vast machine used in the experiment. Also, our investigations indicate. Can you confirm your involvement? Yes, I constructed it, in precise accordance with the blueprints, but that's all. And the court would be very interested to hear your thoughts about the machine, I'm sure. An amazing device, if you ask me. The pinnacle of modern science, making instantaneous kinesis a reality at last. What?
Good gracious. Do you mean to say that the experiment was bona fide? Is that your belief, sir?
Yes, that is very much my belief. Such a waste that it blew up.
Objection!
But we've already established the machine was nothing more than a prop for an elaborate conjuring trick.
Objection!
You've established nothing of the sort. All that was shown during yesterday's proceedings is that the same outcome could have been produced by means of staged trickery. My defense merely proposed a method and demonstrated its feasibility. Nothing more. But...
We've procrastinated long enough, I feel. Witness, you will now give your formal testimony about the machine that you constructed for the purpose of the demonstration at the Great Exhibition.
Understood. The Kinesis Machine. I met the young professor approximately 1 year ago through Mr. Asman's introduction. He provided me with the blueprints and I constructed the machine to its precise specifications. It was no trick. If the whole show was a fraud, it would have required a body double. Tell me, did the victim have a twin? All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads and then crash headfirst into the crystal tower. So, what? No one reported that originally. Would be nice if they did. A terrible accident, I grant you. Perhaps the science on which the machine was built was flawed somehow. A body double? That goes without saying, surely. To give the impression that something has moved when in reality it hasn't. It's a basic conjuring principle. The deception could not be achieved without substituting the original with a fake at some point in the performance. But would I be right in saying you haven't managed to establish anything along those lines? Incidentally, the prosecution has already confirmed that Mr. Asman had no twin siblings.
It's my understanding that this witness is well versed in conjuring artfulness. But such sounds do not indicate that he was actually able to accomplish what he claims. Namely, the construction of what, by all accounts, must have been an extremely complex scientific machine.
Whatever do you mean?
Yesterday's proceedings brought the true nature of your past exploits to light, Mr. Drebber.
Indeed it did, my lord. As a swindler who preys on innocent scientists to elicit government grant money through conjuring know-how. Yes, it's true that I possess considerable knowledge of stage magic. But crucially, my scientific knowledge more than matches that of any academic in the field. Investigation of the witness's workshop attests to that claim, my lord. As evidence, the police found this Royal Society trophy for young talent in science there. Yes, that's true. We spotted it there ourselves. If a hypothesis is sound, it can always be forged into a physical manifestation with sufficient skill. Though I may have sold the secrets of some deceptive wiles to sniveling talentless scientists in the past.
Would you therefore assert that the explosion of the machine was
an unfortunate accident? Or, of course, a deliberate act of murder carried out by misuse of the science?
Counsel for the defense. Your cross-examination, please.
Yes, my lord. The Kinesis Machine. I met the young professor approximately 1 year ago through Mr. Asman's introductions. So you already acquainted with Mr. Asman himself? Not really. By chance I'd seen his name mentioned in the papers, that's all. But I had no interest in his private affairs. If he was an unscrupulous investor, it was no concern of mine. As long as people pay their bills, I take up my tools and construct what they ask for. So why did Mr. Asman approach you in particular, then? Who can say? I presume because my name is associated with excellence in engineering. Not to mention excellence in fraud. Hard to gauge, but the point is, all I did was construct the machine according to the blueprints I was given. In other words, the Kinesis Machine was built on solid scientific principles. Yes, you might say that. Professor Hairbrain certainly has a mind like no other. He provided me with the blueprints and I constructed the machine to his precise specifications. It was no trick. Hold it! It's clear that you have both scientific knowledge and knowledge of conjuring magic. However, the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to handle whatever comes along. But your implication is that I furnished the machine with some trickery, I think. It's a possibility that we have yet to explore. Unfortunately, though, the machine has been blown to Kingdom Come. So there's really nothing left to explore, is there? It appears that the Kinesis Machine was fitted with a timed explosive device of some kind. And there's nothing left of that device either. Not a single shred of evidence remaining, I hear. He must have planned all this from the outset. But in any case, it's abundantly clear that the experiment couldn't have been a trick. If the whole show was a fraud, it would have required a body double. Tell me, did the victim have a twin? Hold it! Of course, that's it! Mr. Asman was a twin!
Objection!
I mean, he just told us that. Perhaps my learned friend wasn't listening earlier. Mr. Asman had no twin siblings. No, I heard you before, but the thread of hope hadn't quite left me. Demonstration could have been a trick if there was somebody who looked sufficiently like the victim. And Miss Dr. Saib absolutely ruled that out as a possibility. It is beyond question that the victim himself, Mr. Asman, did move from the stage to the Crystal Tower. The fingerprints found at the scene attest to the fact. So it can have been orchestrated using someone who looked identical to Mr. Asman then. What are you thinking, Mr. Nalahodo? Oh, no, nothing. That's the problem. Just so the idea of someone who looked identical to the victim is playing on my mind. Ah, yes. All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads and then crash headfirst into the Crystal Tower. I mean, I didn't hear a single one say this. Oh! Hold it! I think I just figured something out. That's probably why it's... Yes. It crashed head first, you say? According to the many witness reports from those there at the time, yes. Were you not there at the exhibition grounds on the day? Unlikely. I rarely leave my workshop. Yet another of your unique inventions was found at the scene. Well, it was the unveiling of a machine I'd labored over for many months. I saw it clearly with my own eyes, the birdcage plummeting headfirst into the tower. What a surprise. I believe the victim's neck was broken from the headlong fall, wasn't it? How would you have come by that information? Even an infernal recluse like me reads the newspapers, you know. According to the reports, 2 injuries were apparent on the victim's body. Yes, he'd been stabbed in the chest by a screwdriver believed to belong to the defendant. And he had broken vertebrae as a result of a fall from a considerable height. Correct, my learned friend has been doing his research, it seems. Do we know which injury was the fatal one? Sadly not. Forensic science is not yet at a level where such things can be determined. What we do know is that the victim died having sustained both injuries at some point during the experiment. And since he was found in the birdcage with his neck broken, it's obvious that he fell from a considerable height. I suppose it's hard to deny. Right, a terrible accident, I grant you. Perhaps the science on which the machine was built was flawed somehow. Despite the fact you said it was better earlier. But I finally figured out why this statement was so flagrantly weird, because, of course, no one really said that in the first place, it felt like. But the issue is... fell head first, fell feet first. That's the issue.
Objection!
We've examined the birdcage that crashed into the Crystal Tower ourselves. As you can see, the cage, which is a wooden construction, has sustained damage in one particular spot. Following the explosion, it fell some 30 feet into the glass of the Crystal Tower. That level of damage is to be expected, surely. I agree. The damage itself is entirely understandable. What doesn't make sense is the location of that damage. All the breakages in the wood are at the base of the birdcage, not the top. What are you saying?
That's the opposite of where they should be.
That's right, my lord. Birdcage that was at the scene is damaged at its base. So we have reports of the birdcage falling headlong into the Crystal Tower. Yet the damage is at the bottom. The only way to reconcile these two facts is to accept that there were 2 bird cages in play that day, which were at some point switched. Switched during that what wasn't a scientific experiment at all, but an elaborate piece of staged trickery. Ah!
Good gracious! Explain yourself, witness.
Well... if we examine the facts, there's only one logical conclusion we can draw. The damage on the base of the birdcage clearly indicates that it crashed tail first into the tower.
Objection!
but multiple witness reports claim it fell headfirst.
The birdcage materialized in the sky next to a balloon flying over the stage following a spontaneous explosion at any altitude or at an altitude of some 60 feet above ground level,
which is approximately 18 meters.
It then proceeded to fall some 30 feet into the Crystal Tower in the ensuing deflagration. Witness reports amid such chaos are notoriously unreliable.
Objection!
But the victim's neck was broken.
Objection!
He plummeted 30 feet inside a heavy wooden cage. However he fell, it would be unsurprising to find one or two of his vertebrae crushed. A riveting scientific analysis of events from the prosecution there. Though to be even more rigorous, you would have to say it was only one vertebra, actually.
He wasn't quite for long. I find it hard to see what's motivating Lord Van Zeeks. This witness is clearly a swindler and one who deceived a personal friend of his. If you're going to establish this deception, do it right. Sorry, I feel like that's the undertone here.
Ah yes, and there's one more point. The defense appears to have forgotten. It obviously wasn't a trick, as a certain truth very plainly demonstrates.
What?
It seems to me that the cross-examination had better continue until we resolve this matter. Mr. Drebber, you will amend your testimony with details of this truth. Of course, we must treat the matter scientifically after all.
And then he had him there.
The kinesis clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from. I mean...
Hold it!
The balloon.
What do you mean? Well, before the demonstration began, the victim was alive on stage in front of the audience. Yes, there are lots of witnesses who saw Mr. Asman on the experimentation stage, that's true. And the victim's neck broke as a result of an impact following a fall. Logically, therefore, the victim must have fallen from somewhere. The balloon that exploded was at an altitude of 60 feet. The point of impact on the tower was 30 feet up. That difference of 30 feet is therefore the total distance the birdcage fell. And there's no other location from which the cage could have fallen that distance if it didn't drop out of the sky. Ergo, the victim himself must have been beamed from the stage into the sky above the Crystal Tower. A trenchant scientific analysis. Dear me, every time I hear it explained, it sounds increasingly plausible. Oh yes, it's all very well thought out.
Certainly all the spectators on the day saw it. Birdcage plummeting 30 feet through the air, I mean. Irritatingly, yes. Irritatingly indeed.
So it's either this statement, which we have not pressed yet, or of course because it's a revised statement, we've got to find an issue with it. The issue isn't found by pressing, but surely it's because of a balloon, right? I mean, even the balloons in the sketch. So what do we do? Present the balloon? Present things as they were on that day? Present a picture of Drebber to Drebber? Present this photograph? Of the balloon? Though, to be honest, I feel like this photograph might have an issue. I wish I could zoom. Oh, wait, I can. I wish I could see that head more clearly. You know what I mean? I really wish I could. Zoop. Woo! I don't know. So what's the thing? The Kinesis clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from. So it's either this,
or this? It's one of these three things. I've just got to decide on which. Shows another balloon that he claims was green exploded moments after he took his shot. I guess you can't tell relative height. I guess I'm going to go with this on the basis that it puts the balloons above things and it has kind of like a sizeometer kind of thing going up the side. I don't know. It's one of these three things. It's very unlikely to be the piece of green cloth, so it's either the photograph of the balloon or it's this experiment sketch.
Objection!
This is a diagram of the experimentation stage and its surroundings. I went with the most likely, and that is correct. We know that somehow the birdcage appeared in midair before falling down into the crystal tower. A fall of about 30 feet, or 9 meters. However, if you examine the diagram carefully, you'll see that there is one other possible location from which the birdcage could have fallen. The same distance of 30 feet. No.
Well, it appears the defense has a possible explanation to put forward. Go ahead, counsel.
Yes, my lord. Of course. Wait, I thought I was doing a balloon. Wait a second. The same distance of 30 feet is the tower itself? I even did the whole thing. Could it just simply be that? No, it's definitely from the balloon. Now you're making me think different things, game. Yes, my lord, of course. I don't even know.
You will indicate the place to which you are referring on this same diagram. The alternative location from which the birdcage could possibly have fallen the requisite 30 feet.
I don't... Wait. No, it really is saying that. Because I can't present here again, because this is where this is marked as where it fell 30 feet. But you're saying 30 feet is that long, and that's about 30 feet. So we're talking like here, aren't we? Here to here? I mean, we saw it had a grate. I was messing about, thinking, the waxwork's in here and the body's still over here. Is this really what I'm doing?
Take that!
The place I'm referring to is here.
But that's where the birdcage would have been to begin with.
Which is exactly the point, my lord. Yes, the birdcage was in the machine on the stage. But what we must also consider is the height of the stage itself.
Now go on, counsel.
It turns out that the experimentation stage was built at a considerable height above ground level. If you look at the diagram, in fact, you'll see it's at about the same height above the ground as the balloon was above the crash site. When the experiment got underway, the machine and the birdcage were engulfed in steam. At that moment, the floor of the stage gave way, and if we assume there to be a void underneath, this birdcage and the one seen by the audience would have fallen almost exactly the same distance. The game led me into that quite well, I feel. Once again, my lord, this all points to the fact that there was not one birdcage, but two.
Objection!
My learned friend has no evidence that the stage has such a contrivance in its design. Someone is responsible for the criminal destruction of the Kinesis Machine itself, is true. However, the stage still stands. And take a moment to look at the photographic print of the scene following yesterday's explosion.
Good lord! The metal grill that formed the floor of the machine is undone.
Yes, most likely blown open by the force of the explosion that destroyed the rest of the machine. The defense calls for the space below the stage to be investigated immediately. Mr. Drebber, it was you who built the Kinesis Machine. which means that it was you who built the 2 bird cages that were used to carry out this deception. Whether Professor Hairbrain's hypothesis is sound or not makes no difference, because it's the construction of this machine that matters. A machine designed to take Mr. Asmon's life and lay the blame firmly at the Professor's door. Something that could only have been carried out by you, Mr. Enoch Drebber.
Objection!
If my learned friend has reached the end of his wild assertions, the prosecution would like to crush the defense's arguments slowly, but surely. What? Your argument fails to hold water. On 2 counts. 2! Firstly, before and after the experiment, this witness went nowhere near the Kinesis Machine. Every relevant member of staff from the exhibition has attested to that.
And I believe members of Scotland Yard have also been on watch duty at every public experiment.
In other words, Mr. Drebber had no opportunity to switch the alleged pair of bird cages.
Objection!
But I've already explained why he wouldn't have needed to. The nonsense with the crossbow, that doesn't bolster your case at all. The man who disappeared from the stage and the man who crashed into the tower are one and the same. The forensic investigation team's report is unequivocal on that point. And the second flaw in your assertion is a distinct lack of motive. Why would this man have wanted to take the victim's life? He had no reason to do so. A motive? Do I have to think of everything myself? I have here a contract provided by the witness.
What contract is this, Lord Van Zeeks?
The contract into which Mr. Drebber entered with the victim, Mr. Asmon. It reads, Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all remunerations from government grants or other income.
30%? Certainly very favorable contractual conditions.
But there was one very important provision bolted onto that clause. What provision? Mr. Drebber may only uphold this right on condition that both contracting parties are alive. In other words, if either of us were to die, the contract would become null and void. So you see, I had nothing to gain from Mr. Asmon's death. The diametric opposite, in fact. Need I say more? The witness had neither an opportunity nor a reason to commit the alleged crime. In short, the possibility of Mr. Drebber having done as you suggest is nil.
It seems the defense's assertion was somewhat wide of the mark. Lord Van Zeeks, you will submit the contract as evidence, please.
Drebber's contract has been entered into the court record. Let's have a read of that then. It's true. If Drebber had no opportunity to switch the birdcage under the stage with the one in the Crystal Tower, he couldn't have done it. And in any case, I have no idea what his motive might have been. There is one aspect of your argument that still holds true, however. There were 2 birdcages. The prosecution is unable to deny that. So I'm sure you're on the right lines, Mr. Naruhodo. And I've no doubt there are other aspects of your assertion that are undeniable truths too.
Well, it would seem as the defense has no rejoinder to offer.
Well, I must say I'm a little surprised. I came here to testify about the machine I built, and instead my reputation is defiled. But the prosecution's counter has set the record straight, I think. It's impossible that I'm the culprit.
Objection!
At the beginning of this trial, we believed that there was only 1 birdcage. Yet now we know there must have been 2. In other words, there was more to the demonstration than we realized at first. I think it's abundantly clear that the same applies to the culprit. Well, I think we'll end things up here. As Ryunosuke has rallied, he's got himself back together. But the other reason we're ending things here is because before proceedings continue too much further, we need to read this contract. The contract between Mr. Asman and Mr. Drebber detailing the terms by which they would profit from the Kinesis experiment. In terms of investment, the investor, Mr. Odi Asman, hereby enters into contract with the provider, Mr. Enoch Drebber, to fund labor and materials for the construction of a super high voltage instantaneous Kinesis machine. Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all remunerations from government grants or other income. Mr. Drebber may only uphold this right on condition that both contracting parties are alive. So you just really wanted him dead then? Wasn't about the money, is what you've got to assume. Wasn't about the money. However, we continue to cast aspersions on the already tainted character of Enoch Drebber next time, by the look of things. Let's see where this leads as we continue with the Great Ace Attorney 2 Resolve. I'll see you next time for more. Bye-bye.